An abala was a cloak-like garment worn by ancient Greeks and Romans. Nonius Marcellus quotes a passage of Varro to show that it was a garment worn by soldiers, and thus opposed to the toga.
The abala was, however, not confined to military occasions, but also worn in the city. It was especially used by the Stoic philosophers at Rome as a pallium philosophicum, just as the Greek philosophers were accustomed to distinguish themselves by a particular dress.
The chlamys was an ancient Greek piece of clothing, a type of cloak. The chlamys was made from a seamless rectangle of woolen material about the size of a blanket, usually bordered. It was normally pinned with a fibula at the right shoulder. Originally, it was wrapped around the waist like a loincloth, but by the end of the 5th century BC, it was worn over the elbows. It could be worn over another item of clothing, but it was often the sole item of clothing for young soldiers and messengers, at least in Greek art.
As such, the chlamys is a characteristic garment of Hermes, the messenger god usually depicted as a young man. The chlamys was typically Greek military attire from the 5th to the 3rd century BC. As worn by soldiers, it could be wrapped around the arm and used as a light shield in combat. The chlamys continued into the Byzantine period, when it was much often larger and worn sideways. It was held on with a clasp at the shoulder and nearly reached the ground at front and back.
The eximus was a Greek tunic used by workers and light infantry. The tunic largely replaced by the older Titaniscos as the main tunic of the hoplites during the later 5th century BC. It was made of 2 rectangles of linen, which were stitched together from the sides of a form of cylinder, leaving enough space at the top for the arms. An opening at the top was also left for the head.
The cylinder was gathered up at the waist with a cloth belt using a reef knot, which made the cloth fall down over the belt, hiding it from view. To allow freedom of movement to the right arm, the seam at the right shoulder was taken apart, and the right hand was passed through the head opening.
The color of the tunic varied, but red, especially crimson, was increasingly the standard color preferred by the hoplites during and after the Peloponnesian War. The eximus could be worn in conjunction with the chlamys cape.
A peplos is a body-length Greek garment worn by women before 500 BC. The peplos is a tubular cloth folded inside out from the top about halfway down, altering what was the top of the tube to the waist and the bottom of the tube to the ankle length. The garment is then gathered about the waist and the open top pinned over the shoulders. The top of the tube drapes over the waist, providing the appearance of a second piece of clothing.
The kolpos is the blousing of a peplos, chiton or tunic in an ancient Greek clothing, whereby excess length of materials hang folded over a zone. The fabric of the garment was typically cut longer than the shoulder-to-floor measurements of women or men wearing it. The excess length was dealt with at the waist and optionally the top edge.
To create the kaplos, a zone was tied around the body below the breast or at the waist, and excess fabric was pulled up over it. The fabric fell over the girdle so as to hide it and was often pulled longer in back than in front. This fold was the kaplos. A second zone could be tied over the kaplos to redefine the waist, high or low. This might be hidden again by the apotna, the loose, folded down top of the peplos. A himation was a type of clothing in ancient Greece. It was usually worn over a chiton, but was made of heavier drapery and played the role of a cloak. The himation was less voluminous than the Roman toga. When the himation was used alone and served both as a chiton and as a cloak, it was called an achinton. The himation continued into the Byzantine era, especially as an iconographic dress for Christ and other biblical figures, although it appears to still have been worn in real life, especially by older men of relatively low status.
A chiton was a form of clothing worn by men and women in ancient Greece. From the Archaic period to the Hellenistic period, the chiton is the same as the tunic and is sewn garment. Unlike the peplos, a draped garment held by the shoulders by a fibula, there are 2 forms of chitons, the Doric chiton and later the Iconic chiton. The Doric style was simpler and had no sleeves, being simply pinned, sewn, or buttoned at the shoulder. The Iconic style was made of a much wider piece of fabric. It was pinned, sewn, or buttoned all the way from the neck to the wrist, and the excess fabric gathered by the zone or the girdle at the waist. By the later archaic, Iconic chitons had become less common, especially for men.
A buskin is a knee or calf-length boot made of leather or cloth which laces are closed but is open across the toes. It was worn by Athenian tragic actors, hunters, and soldiers in ancient Greek, Etruscan, and Roman society. The word buskin, meaning half boot, is of unknown origin.
A pedicis is a sun hat, often in combination with the chlamys cape. It was usually made of wool felt, leather, or straw with a broad floppy brim. It was worn primarily by farmers or travelers and was considered characteristic of rural people. As a winged hat, it became the symbol of Hermes, the Greek mythological messenger god.